I grew up in rural central Wisconsin. So I was near a university town, and the town was about 50,000 people, but we were definitely on the outskirts because my dad ran a Christmas tree farm and did a lot of fur trapping. So the majority of my childhood, I was outside all the time, which is pretty spectacular and also makes a lot of sense when you look at my work. And I loved the outdoors. Like I lived to be outside. I was very feral as a child. My parents didn't keep me too reined in and just sort of shoved me out the door every morning. But I did really hate the act of hunting. I never caught that bug, even though everybody in my family, excluding my mother, was extremely passionate about, hunting, fishing, trapping, doing all those things. And they really tried with me, but I just couldn't do it. And to talk a little bit about work, this is a series I did that relates to the first animal I ever killed as a child. So I was 8 years old, and like all 8-year-olds in rural Wisconsin, running around feral with a BB gun. And my father had these little barn swallow houses all over the Christmas tree farm, and he had very clearly instructed me, like, don't shoot the swallows, or I'm sorry, not the swallows, the swallows. Don't shoot the swallows. They're my favorite. We want them here. They're great for the ecosystem. My dad was a trapper and therefore dependent in some regards on like a healthy ecosystem and healthy animals. And the sparrows really contributed to that. So he wanted to keep them thriving. And like a dork, I'm, running around with my BB gun shooting holes in tin cans every single day because I don't have anything better to do. And a sparrow is flying over top, or a swallow is flying over top, and I just idly shoot in the air and happen to hit it, and it falls like, bird like a hammer from the sky. And of course, I start crying because that was really my response to hurting an animal at still is, I guess. And I scooped up this little bird and I ran to my dad, and he proceeded to yell at me as he normally did and kind of, chew me out for killing this bird. And then I went and held like a secret bird funeral because I felt so terrible for shooting this thing. And I think like right off the bat, that was just a great indicator to the kind of person I was going to grow up to be. I didn't want to live in the culture I was raised in, although I was profoundly proud of my family and like love my family. I'm very close with everybody in my family. I just couldn't do it for some reason. There was something in my brain that didn't want me hunting. And at the same time, I was not a terribly successful student in school. So growing up in like grade school and middle school, I was just bad at school. I am very dyslexic. It's something that still affects me. I mean, you heard me saying swallow and sparrow interchangeably. I struggle with those sorts of definitions in my head, especially when I'm not really thinking through things, which meant early on in school, I did not do well. But art became this weird safe space for me where I was adequate. I was an average student when it came to drawing, which meant I gravitated towards that very strongly. And as I failed spelling tests and math tests and did horrible in school, I always had this thing I could fall back on and at least feel like I was average. And because I did it so much, I slowly became better than average. And then next thing you knew, this is like the thing I cared about when I was in school. So I went to the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, which was the university near where I grew up. I grew up in the town of Stockton, which is, you can't really call it a satellite of Stevens Point because there would be no reason for there to be like a suburb or satellite of Stevens Point. It was just this tiny little town that had 3 bars and a post office. But I went to the university and really, I started at a community college because I wasn't able to go to the university because my GPA was really low coming out of high school. And I wasn't in a place where I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't even realize I wanted to do art because, like I said, there wasn't this community that I could tap into. And our community college didn't offer any art courses. It was more like you take business administration or civil engineering or something like that. And I wasn't that wasn't what I was interested in, and I tried to take those courses, but it wasn't working. So I ended up applying and getting into this state school, and I was going for business, and I took one art class and a bunch of business classes, and I went to my first business class, and then I went to an art class and instantly switched majors because I was like, I'm not going to be a business person. This isn't going to work for me. Which ironically, I ended up becoming a small business person because anytime you're freelancing as an artist, you're running a small business. So um, through the process of art making and getting more involved in my small community, I learned a lot about what was important to me as an artist, and it really was connecting with the community. So as an undergraduate, I started just reaching out to everybody I knew who was making art or involved in art in some degree, and sending like Facebook messages because that was really the predominant platform at the time for like social media, and just bothering people, asking questions, which resulted in two really wonderful things. One, I got tied into some of these makers and these craftspeople and realized there was this like secret underground of people who were making art and not really making a living, but like loving the process of making art and getting me excited about it. And two, I started acquiring stuff to have an actual art studio. So everything you see in this picture, including the bicycle, somebody gave me, like they found it in a garbage can, or they knew somebody who was throwing it out, and I was making things and talking to people about making art, and I found this like lovely supportive community that wanted me to be successful or wanted me to make artwork. So people just started showing up like with a drafting table strapped to the back of their Chevy Cobalt, and we're like, hey, I know you draw, and I know you draw on like a crappy kitchen table with a piece of plywood on it. Do you want this drafting table I found on the side of the road? And I was like, yes, absolutely. And it's the drafting table I use to this day. So I really was able to build this studio practice by just being tied into my community, which was so perfect for me. Um, it also taught me to just start asking for things when I needed things, and to start applying for things. So once I came out of undergrad, I started applying for every opportunity I could. And even during undergrad, I was applying to things like crazy. And I didn't know about things like residencies or even really uh, like craft schools and like great opportunities to go specialize in things and learn stuff because they weren't talked about as much in my education for some reason. But as soon as I got out of my undergrad, I just jumped on this whole bandwagon. Like, I'm going to apply for everything. I would get, 3 or 4 rejection letters a week. I still do because I still just apply to anything and everything that comes across as a potential opportunity. But that led to me going to some really cool places and making some really interesting things. So this is where I stayed when I was the resident artist at the Petrified Forest. But I've also been really lucky. I've been the resident artist at a number of state and national parks and private institutions that are really, really cool. So I would suggest to anybody who's interested in making to go do these like national parks residencies and residencies in general. But this is all like right after undergrad, where I'm applying for anything and everything that I can, and I'm hustling super hard. And it started to become kind of soul sucking because I was freelancing. I wasn't working at the time other than making and selling artwork. And the artwork that I was making and selling ended up having to be a lot of things that I was, interested in and fun because I loved the process of making, but maybe not feeding my creative spirit in the same way. So I was doing public artworks like you see here, which were really fun and enjoyable to produce the first few times, but then really felt like something that was formulaic, and people were pretty forward in what they wanted me to do. Like, we want this, you do this for us now. And it's like, okay. And then drawing pet portraits because it was not the best source of income, but I could always like pay my rent and feed myself if I would do a pet portrait every week. And that just, it started to eat away at me quite a bit. and I stopped making work that felt super meaningful to me and started considering, what was going to sell. Like what kind of work can I sell if I do this show so I can pay this rent so that way I can buy some more food and keep buying art supplies. And that kind of mentality just wasn't sustainable for me. I didn't feel like I could live that life that as a kid I thought was so cool when I was looking at a friend or a person I knew in the community who was just doing senior portraits and wedding photography. I was like, you get to like work in a like cool artistic medium. And I realized quickly like that wasn't for me. Um, so I ended up applying to graduate school. But before I did that, I did something that I think was really effective, which was I became part of an artist cooperative. So we had a gallery in our small town that we could rent out really inexpensively because there it was a small town because space downtown was not that sought after at the time. We had like the big Walmart and Target and all that stuff on the other side of town where more of the people went. So our downtown strip was mostly just bars and restaurants. So we rented out this space together and started this artist cooperative where we all were showing work regularly, and that really got me back into the creative swing of things. So I was doing a solo show here every single year, as well as doing one somewhere else. And that forced me to have to make work. And I realized at that time, I need to have things on the horizon. I need to have deadlines and stuff I'm working towards. Otherwise, I will just make things that would support me. Um, I also then started teaching middle school, which was uh, kind of life changing and formative, and taught me that I really wanted to work in education, which was something I just never thought was a possibility. But I also realized I didn't want to work in middle school education because they were amazing and exhausting because they are just going and going and going and going. And after you teach like 9 classes in a row, you're just done. So I realized I wanted to go to grad school and try and reconnect with that like feeling I had in undergraduate where all the work I was making was so meaningful to me. I was always thinking about like, why am I making this? Who is this for? How is this feeding me? How is this changing me? Those sort of really important things that can fall by the wayside when you're worried about a paycheck or only worried about a paycheck. So at this time, I went back to grad school and I started making a lot of artwork that was based in personal stories. And I started traveling a little bit more when I could. All of this was dependent on if I could afford to go someplace or if I could find somebody who would help me afford to go someplace, like applying for a grant or through the university or outside of the university, or finding residencies that had a little bit of funding for travel. So I made this at Brush Creek, which is such an it recently closed during the pandemic, but was such an interesting residency because it was this beautiful, beautiful, like 1,000 acre or something. It was just amazingly big. I can't remember how big it was. Resort that they had done this artist residency program as like a tax write-off. So the first day I got there, Bruce Springsteen and John Mayer were there. So it was like this very surreal experience. And then off in the corner of this like gorgeous resort that you drive through, there's these like little cabins, and they're like, this is where you stay. And I went there and I started making work and thinking about like these situations I kept finding myself in where I was surrounded by like this natural beauty that I was so interested in that was juxtaposed with these weird situations where humans had really encroached and kind of started stepping on things. So this piece of work resulted in me going on a walk one afternoon or one evening, and I was hustling back to my truck because it was getting dark and feeling very self-righteous about how I cared about animals and how this stuff was so important to me and blah blah blah. And then I promptly stepped on a bird's nest and felt just absolutely awful about it, and kind of had that realization that no matter how hard I try, I'm part of this situation, and I need to continue to be aware that we're all doing the best we can to like navigate an increasingly complex world where we can't help but cause a little bit of damage to animal lives. Um, which really just tied into my graduate work so well. I was using personal stories or stories from my upbringing and family to try and navigate this relationship I had with animals, and understanding why they were so important to me, whether it was a personal experience or a story from somebody in my family who was struggling with addiction, and really like relating to living in the woods or hiding in the woods from that addiction, or whatever it was. I was constantly making these pieces, and eventually I realized that I wanted to focus solely on animal issues. I wanted to remove myself more from that process, because I kept getting questions about what does it mean for people who aren't raised in the same circumstances of you, poor, rural, in a family that was focused around animal lives. How does this relate to somebody who grew up in Chicago or something like that? So I started removing myself from the work and thinking about the work in regards to just animal lives and what it means to be an animal, and what it means to have to live in a way where you are less in control of your own life, which I think is something that is relatable to all humans at one point or another. So I started working on my graduate work, which was a series of large drawings that are actually in your gallery right now. So you've all seen them. And I wanted to include just some process shots, because I always think process is sort of fun to watch develop. So for these really large scale drawings, I was struggling to figure out how to do them because they were so big, and I draw in a very physical way. I like to lay things flat or on the wall and lean against them and touch them and draw, with my whole arm, and erase with my whole arm. And the paper started to fall apart. And I've always worked with almost predominantly analog processes, so letterpress printing and like analog illustration. But I realized at this time, like, I was never going to be able to produce these large scale drawings if I worked solely analog, because the paper just kept falling apart halfway through the drawing. So I actually started doing these illustrations digitally. So I would draw them out in Photoshop, and then print them on a banner printer. And I would be left with, you can't, the black lines are actually too dark, and I don't know how good the projector is in your room right now, but these really light little lines were actually all my sketch lines. So I would have a couple layers in Photoshop. I would sketch everything out that way, and I would run it through a banner printer and end up with these really beautiful sketches. And the paper was in pristine shape and hadn't gone through that roughness of me drawing on it already. And it allowed me to add like additional layers and make the work exactly what I wanted it to be without worrying about it being destroyed. So obviously did my graduate work, as you can see, and started working at Indiana University, teaching graphic design and in letterpress specifically. And of course, I didn't stop making work, because if I stopped making work, I don't know what I would do. So I've been making a new series of work exploring letterpress printing and like the boundaries of letterpress printing. I'm not really working digitally right now. I think that will find a place back in my work soon. But right now I'm back to wholly analog processes, because I teach, I'm teaching over Zoom, and I also teach digital processes in a lot of other courses. I want to get away from the screen, even though I love working with digital processes. But this is a body of work I am putting together right now for a show in New Zealand that I'm really excited about. So using letterpress printing, applying text to the sheet of paper, and then drawing over top of it. And I have just some images of that process, just in case you aren't familiar with letterpress. So letterpress is how we would apply text or create books prior to offset lithography, which came about in the 60s. So everything from the Gutenberg Bible to the 1960s was almost solely printed using letterpress printing. And that's just movable type. And I'll show you that in just a second. But my process for these has been to sketch everything out using a pencil and then drawing over it with a micron pen or a dip pen. and then running it through a printing press. This is the movable type. Everything is set backwards from right to left instead of left to right facing forward, because like all relief printing, it comes out mirrored. And then I run it through the printing press and print over top of my drawings. And I use just a light frisket in these areas to mask out where it would overlap, where my text overlaps. So it's a significantly more time consuming process to apply text in this way, but I really like being so connected to the application of text because of how quickly we can apply text using digital processes and how slowly we have to apply text using an analog process. So here is an in progress shot of the work that I'm working on right now. So you can see it's, you know, it's half drawn, but it's kind of coming together. And then lastly, just because this is a the professional practice class, I did want to show the, you know, kind of pile of work that I'm always have going in some manner or another. This is a table just stacked full of drawings that I felt like weren't worthy of living on the wall to show the people I was talking to for this. I make a lot of work all the time because I make a lot of garbage and then occasionally I make something I really like.